Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and remember, when someone describes a man as harmless, he ends up being a villain.
Hi, I'm Daniel Dresner, and did you know that Jewish humor centers around body functions and nudity and being caught in an awkward situation by one's female relatives?
Welcome to Space the Nation, where we look at science fiction through the lens of...
the subaltern.
And dual processual.
I don't know if you can say that word without sounding a little tipsy, Anna.
Yeah. Just leave that in, Karen. I mean,
Yep.
it's. I usually have trouble, and we usually re-record when I have trouble, but that one is just dual processual.
Yep.
Yes, officer. Meso-America was developed dual processual.
And then when the Aztecs and the Incas got together and they partied!
There is some drunken partying in the book we're going to talk about.
That's true.
Today, we'll be talking about Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun, which is available at fine booksellers everywhere. She also has a sequel, Dan.
Which, yeah, how to put this gently, if you don't like cliffhangers, buy both of these books at the same time. Or buy neither of them. It's what basically that's your choice.
Manipulated by cliffhangers.
Yeah.
Either by both or none.
Yes.
In the next few weeks, we'll be talking about musical sci-fi, which is your idea. No, it was a Discord idea.
It was a Discord idea. I was certainly enthusiastic about it then. So, I'm not going to complain. But we will be talking about Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Once More with Feeling and Strange New World's Subspace Rhapsody.
And that should be fun. Although, Dan, I'm actually not a musicals person.
I am not a musicals person either, and yet I am looking forward to this recording. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, I'm a big fan of both of the properties we're talking about. So
right, exactly.
I am optimistic. Yeah. And we're also going to talk about the creator. Dan, you suggested this one.
I did, because I have to admit, the trailers for this one keep blowing me away. This is, I believe, directed by Gareth Edwards, who also directed Rogue One, even though we always associate Rogue One with Tony Gilroy. It seems to be in a sort of near future in which there's a war between humans and AI. And, it's got a pretty good cast. John David Washington, I think, stars in it, but there's a lot of good things.
The trailers are really good. Yeah. I have some
concerns,
reservations about it. I don't know what you can do with that plot line that hasn't been done before, but... It's
possible. Let me put it this way. I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to be good, but you know what? Every once in a while, Anna, I think we actually have to go into a theater. Oh. I'm just going to put it that way.
Leave the house?
I know.
Speaking of leaving the house, Dan, how are you? Have you done anything? Have you actually gone anywhere?
Well... yes, in that I've gone to my synagogue to pray, Anna, because we are recording this during the Days of Awe, which is the time between Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And this is the time in which we are supposed to repent and engage in acts of charity and just generally engage in self-reflection and also ask for forgiveness from others. So, Anna, I would just like to apologize for all the times in the past year where I might have been slow in getting you scripts or trying to think what else. I
think that the
interrupting you
is actually, I was going to say, so
yeah,
I could actually look up how much we interrupt each other because you can tell from the recording.
And I am crushing you, Anna, crushing you.
I make it a point to not look at that, which is the time of, it gives a percentage, who talks the most, right?
Oh, no.
I believe we interrupt each other pretty equally. And I also believe that it is normal to do that, kind of.
Yes, I would agree. No, I'm okay with that. And also, I do think that every once in a while, I think a lot of times, and this is a little bit behind the scenes, but a lot of times when we interrupt each other, it's almost, I think, due to a slight lag in terms of how we record, where we think the other one is done, so we're interjecting even though the other one is not done. I think we've actually managed, I would hope I've reduced the number of times I really, really interrupt you when you're on a good rant to a minimum. But you know what? I apologize for those times. I'm going to try to reduce that number even further as well.
Let's see. So I was actually going to say, I mentioned the word mansplaining, and I don't want that to be a cliffhanger, because what I want to say is that I don't think you ever do that.
Oh, Anna, that means so much to me. That really does.
I think there have been shadows of that, especially at first, because I think sometimes, getting into the IR of something, or like there's a few. I think you've upped the level of what you assume our listeners and I know.
That's probably true in order to avoid the mansplaining is the thing. Yes. Let me put it this way. There are times where how do I put this? You have a great expression on your face sometimes where when I look at it, it's like, oh, damn, I went into professor mode again. Crap. Like, stand down, Dresner, stand down.
Yeah, sometimes I will actually point out that you've done that.
Yeah, oh, totally.
And
totally
I guess,
fair.
Dan, just in the spirit of apologies, you're very patient with me. About all my little quirks, all the things that I like, my rituals and my need to like have things be perfect and be a certain way. And I know from living a life in which other people exist, those things can, start to be irritating. And you've been very patient. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
I love these holidays for you, Dan.
Thank you. And you know what? I think one other apology. I do apologize to our patrons every once in a while, for a variety of reasons. And it really is just sort of life interrupting. We have not always gotten podcasts out on time, or we've said we were going to do one thing and then we call an audible and do something else. And so, we pledge to try to be a little more predictable in this coming year, but nonetheless have fun, which is kind of the whole point of this.
Which is the only reason we do this.
Yes. Speaking of which.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of which, why are we doing this, Anna?
Well, Dan, you said, please explain that this works for the Jewish High Holy Days.
It really does, in the sense that, a couple of things going on. First of all, the Jewish High Holy Days are based on a lunar calendar. It's the start of a new year. And this novel, in many ways, is all about this sort of end of a particular, era and the beginning of a solar eclipse and so on and so forth. And also, I did want to offer when I was praying at synagogue, I did want to offer this to Anna and to all of our listeners. There was a lovely prayer called Ken Yehi Ratzon. And one of the ways it translates is to, may you find space to just be. And Anna, I have to say, when I read that prayer, I was like, you know what? I want to tell Anna that's what I'm praying for her.
That actually makes me a little emotional, Dan.
Oh.
Because it echoes something, sometimes life rhymes. And that is something that I have heard from other friends of mine, that what they want for me is for me to just be able to take my life easy. Like to not work so hard in ways that I probably don't need to.
That's the important part, yes.
That there is a lot about my life that I can just let be. Anyway, I thought of this book because I am fascinated by non-Anglo high fantasy.
Yes, which definitely is.
Yeah, and there's a bunch out there these days. It's a growing field. This is fairly unique. I'm sure that there are other high fantasy, Meso-America, indigenous plots out there. But this is the one that has gotten the most attention, and I thought it would be
gotten
very
a lot of
interesting.
critical praise.
Got a ton of praise. So I put it on our list, and I do not regret it.
Good.
I did want to ask you, Dan.
Yes, Anna.
What do you think a Jewish inflected high fantasy book would be like?
Well, there'd be a lot of guilt. Let's get that out of the way. I confess. So we've talked about this, and we might add a Jewish high fantasy, around Hanukkah. I confess, and this is my own version of Judaism, my one concern about this is that I suspect a Jewish high fantasy is going to lean heavily into the sort of Jewish mysticism stuff, the Kabbalah, Madonna, that stuff. And that is not my favorite part.
Madonna's
Madonna's popularized this. Yes, exactly. Well, do you remember her Kabbalah phase? She had this
I do.
And I'm not a big fan of that part. I'm assuming there's got to be a golem in any kind of Jewish high fantasy, though. That'll be the key thing.
Yeah, I texted you some suggestions that I found from Googling, and I saw that in some of the synopsi.
Ooh, synopsi, that's a good word. Nicely done.
But I think there's probably stuff out there. I'm optimistic we're going to find something, and
we'll find something. Yeah, I like the idea of doing that.
On one of the lists was particularly meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. And I thought of you, which was there. Yes, there is a Jewish Narnia.
Okay, I have to admit, if we find the Jewish Narnia book, we might have to do that just to.
I think I can say I'm going to push it if you don't, because I find the idea fascinating. So we're going to do something along those lines at some point. But let's get back to Rebecca Roanhorse's Black Sun. Mm-hmm. Will this podcast ruin it for listeners? If they listen to this podcast before reading it, is it going to ruin the book?
I don't think so, Anna. I mean, I don't think there's a plot twist in this book. I mean that literally in the sense that there's a plot, and I don't mean to deny, there's plot, there's tension. There's a few tiny things, but I don't think there's anything that surprised me in this book. And I don't mean that in a critical way. I just mean that you're not going to, listening to this, we're not going to reveal a plot spoiler where it's oh God, that ruins it for the whole book. And of course, as you recall, when we do the book podcast, we're not going to be diving too deeply into the plot. So no, I don't think it really will ruin it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. I think you should, but I don't think you need to read it necessarily before you hear the podcast.
And I feel like we should have a name for the category that I'm about to describe, which is if you're interested in this book, I would recommend you read it before you listen to the podcast. Mm-hmm. Because it does have a plot and it unfolds in some surprising, not surprising, but there are things that happen that you don't necessarily see coming. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is telegraphed because one of the ways it's high fantasy is that it sticks to a pretty familiar, arc.
Structure.
Structure. Yeah. But, I got, there's stuff that happened that was interesting. And so, I mean, if you're at all interested, stop right now, come back. If you're only mildly interested, well, we may make you more interested and you can read it and you will not have had it ruined for you.
And we do need to come up with a word, I think what we need to do is, defense conditions, like DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5. We need some sort of color.
There you go.
For this
ruin sort of 1, ruin 2.
That's right. Ruin 5 is we tell you the end of The Sixth Sense. Yeah. And Ruin 1 is we try to describe Southland tales and fail to do so.
Yeah, or The Gone World, which is
there we go. Yes,
the plot that broke you.
The plot that broke me. Yes.
So, previous experience, Dan?
None. I did not even heard of this book, Anna. I'm ashamed to mention. So glad I read it. Let me put it that way.
So I heard about it right when it came out and bought it, and then it sat on my shelf for a very long time, and it got good reviews and everything, but it just didn't call to me for whatever reason. And then, I think we'd been on something of a white guy streak or something, and I thought, this is interesting. I do sometimes suggest stuff that I have been reluctant to dive into, but want a reason to, So that was kind of along these lines. And I'm glad we did it. Yeah, I enjoyed this. It has problems, which we will discuss, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, so did I. Why don't we get to the story behind the story, Anna? And how to put this gently, reading the book, it was basically, I suspected Roanhorse was hey, Game of Thrones, what if we did that, but not based on England, but rather based on pre-Columbian, America and Meso-America. Am I wrong in that?
It's a kind of subtle appropriation, Dan. I don't know how you picked up on it, but Yeah, that's what she set out to do. I am sort of curious about what you think of when you think it was like Game of Thrones. Like, can you just name quickly like what the things are that you were like, oh, this is Game of Thrones in
I want to be very clear. When I say Game of Thrones, in some ways,
Aztec world.
No, it's almost how do I put this? It's almost a question of capitalism. In other words, Game of Thrones, I think, was when the HBO show started. That, I think, triggered a whole host of new fantasy series based on, the sort of interlocking plots and multiple books and so on and so forth. So I agree with you. There's actually very little that is the one similarity that I think is pretty strong to Game of Thrones is that I think both series have the same ratio of reality to magic, if that makes any sense.
Which is one of the things I liked and found interesting about the book. You're right.
I agree. Yeah.
The thing about it that I would say, yeah, I mean, I understand you're kind of saying it was like an elevator pitch way, right?
Yeah,
this is the Meso-American Game of Thrones.
Right.
I would say that what makes it high fantasy, like Game of Thrones, is interlocking plots, for sure. Kind of a quest narrative, several different quest narratives.
Yeah.
And specifically like Game of Thrones, it's a world in which magic exists, but that people are kind of like, I don't know, really? Dragons?
It exists. It's not paramount. And in fact, when it's actually deployed, it's unsettling to a lot of people, I think would be the way to put it.
And I think she walks that line really well. Especially,
I agree
we'll talk about the main characters, but I like that the priests have a spectrum of belief about about their own religion.
Right. No, and that's extremely well done.
So I'll talk a little bit about this. There's some pretty interesting stuff. She did indeed decide that there's a paucity of fantasy inspired by Native American cultures. And her argument is she suspects this is because a lot of writers think of those indigenous cultures as being fairly primitive pre-conquest. You and I, because we've had to take history that goes back into that era for some reason, college, and probably a lot of people will know that is not true. Like the South American native cultures had some incredibly sophisticated civilizations. The mystery of them is how some of them disappeared, but they had sewer systems and high rises and, ropes and pulleys to like sort of elevator things. They had very complicated trade. They had banking, so much stuff that you can pull from. So that is a lot to pull from for her. And I think she did I don't want to say I call it a good job. What I want to say is I think she presented those cultures or borrowed from those cultures for her world in a really interesting way. And it's a very vibrant culture that she described. I think her visual...
I would say cultures, plural. I think one of the interesting things about this book is that although it's describing one place, it's sufficiently big such that there are plenty of different like little subcultures. And it's the interaction of those subcultures is actually quite interesting. Yeah,
you're totally right. And I think that in her writing, she depicts them fairly vividly. The way that people dressed, the kind of homes that they have, what they find is important. Like, what is the commodity in that culture that is the most important thing?
It's all about the cacao, baby.
It's all about the cacao. I think my favorite subculture was the teak subculture, which is actually based on Polynesian life. And
I was wondering about that. Okay, yeah.
There's a little bit of fantasy thrown in there. It's an all-female society, and that I am hoping. I actually borrowed the next book from the library, and I'm kind of hoping that it gets more into teak culture because there's some interesting asides.
I had questions as I was reading about teak culture. Let's put it that way. Yes.
Another thing that's interesting is she decided to have one of her main characters be blind, and she had a disability sensitivity reader, which more and more authors do this kind of thing. And I think she threaded the needle with this one. Not being disabled myself in that way, but I think she depicted blindness in a way that feels accurate without making the blindness itself magical, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
He has superpowers, but it's not like because he's blind, he has superpowers.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's also a little bit based on the lost city of Cahokia, which is in Annalee Newitz's book. about lost
Oh.
cities. So she has a thank you to friend of the pod, Annalee Newitz. Now, it was nominated for a bunch of awards. It got a lot of good reviews. She became one of Marvel's Indigenous voices. And then she made a short trip to Pennsylvania.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
I don't think
let's
she's
hear
a
about it.
full-time resident.
Okay.
But her first novel took place in Dene culture, which is Navajo culture.
Okay.
And it initially got very good reviews. And then there was kind of a movement by Dene Navajo activists and readers to point out that that was not her culture.
She's not Navajo, or she's not
Right.
Danita.
But then it kind of gets complicated because she was adopted by a white family. And that in and of itself is a whole, I mean, it is literally, there's a 2-season podcast that I like a lot called This Land that gets into the problems and the legacy of white people adopting Native children and how it kind of screws up a lot of cultural legacies and cultural connections. You know, she doesn't have a bloodline she can point to. So when she talked about her lineage, some people said, well, she's not enrolled in those tribes. I don't want to get too far into it.
Yeah, neither do I.
I will just point out that she has removed references to the specific tribe that she claimed to be a descendant or to have a connection to. And that might be the solution, right? Like she's sort of said, okay, I won't claim that. And if you are interested in the problems that come with that kind of cross adoption, I do recommend This Land. There was a big Supreme Court case over the Indian Child Welfare Act not too long ago. And with that, Dan, let's move on.
Yes. Let us leave Pennsylvania and enter Chekhov's.
She had a short visit. It was just like her visa expired. Left.
I'm glad she's no longer there. Let's put it that way. Let's get to Chekhov's What's It. This is the thing that often appears in the first act of the book that winds up being relevant in the last act. Anna, what do you have?
I have Chekhov's raising someone from the dead ceremony, which is a little bit of a cheat.
It's not really a cheat
just
because
a plot device,
right? And,
well, I guess Chekhov's What's It is a plot device.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
we'll talk about that.
It actually turns out to be a good head fake, I think. Shall I go ahead and explain it? Because we've already.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, because I want to hear how you think this
opening
works.
chapter.
Right.
You think Naranpa, is being killed or sacrificed.
Right. Mm-hmm.
By the end of the book, you understand this is actually a ceremony to raise her from the dead.
Right.
So, I think that worked. Like, I kind of saw it coming, like, once the characters were reintroduced, but, you know.
This is where
maybe we did ruin this book for people.
No, I did. Let me put it this way. This was something where, honestly, maybe it was because I didn't read it in, like, you know, from cover to cover immediately, but I had forgotten that chapter appeared in the first part of the book by the time I got to the end of the book. And this is a 450-page book. It reads relatively quickly, but it's a long book.
It's epic high fantasy.
Yeah, it's epic high fantasy. And so there's ways in which it's on me that I'd forgotten that, but like it wasn't until I reread that part I was like, oh, right, okay. And so I wasn't as crazy about that, but it absolutely works for the Chekhov's What's It thing. My Chekhov's What's It, I guess, is Chekhov's crow Benunda, who, you know, we do see introduced about midway through and plays a pretty important transport role towards the end of the book. Yeah.
And another criticism I have of the book, not enough talking animals.
Yeah.
I was promised talking animals.
There should have been, like, I wanted another chapter just about the crows talking amongst themselves. So, yeah.
Oh, I can point that out from the story behind the story. Crows do have very complicated social relations. They do mate for life, but are not monogamous, if that makes sense. But they maintain ties with other crows, and they will like gang up on attacker to one crow. Like if someone, so they are an interesting and specific choice that she made to have crows be the magical, the most prominent magical animal. Although I also loved the choice of having a bug be one of the magical animals.
Yes. No. Like the whole, again, it did, let me put it this way, the use of the Mesoamerican and North American, not exact setting, obviously, but that feel, I think, really worked for the book. And it made it very distinct from any sort of, high fantasy that clearly had more European origins.
But speaking of all those things, Dan.
Let's get to our jacket blurb. So, we do this with any book and or television show in which the plot is just too difficult to break down. But here we go. Welcome to the Meridian, where peace has reigned for more than 3 centuries, after a treaty was signed in which local religions were put to one side in favor of a sun priest and a priestly caste. While there are still ongoing tensions, like the bloodletting of the Knight of Knives a few generations ago, when that same priestly caste slaughtered a lot of the carrion crow, things have largely been tranquil. The Meridian's spiritual center is in the holy city of Tova, divided between 4 Sky-Maid clans and the poorer, more material dwellers of the Coyote's Maw. The rest of the Meridian is defined by the Crescent Sea. Some areas, like the Teak, the War College at Hokoya, and the port of Tovashe, are mostly run by women. Other places, like the Obregi Mountains or the commercial city of Coecola, are dominated by men. A convergence is coming, which means a solar eclipse, and a whole lot of people are preparing for the big celebration in Tova. The new sun priest, Naranpa, is trying to reassert the priestly authority, but she keeps running up against the priesthood's internal politics and her awkward status as an outsider from the Maw. Serapio, an offspring of a Tova woman and an Obregi man, exists as a vessel trained and blinded by his mother, Saya, to extract vengeance against those priests. Ciala, an exiled Teak woman, is hired by Lord Balam to ferry Serapio across the Crescent Sea to Tova.
An exiled drunken sailor Teak woman.
Oh.
No, I think that's cool. I like that.
Yes. I figured you would identify with Ciala. Yeah. Anyway, she's hired by Lord Balam to ferry Serapio across the Crescent Sea to Tova in time for the convergence. Her crew is just a bit wary about the journey and having a Teak woman for a captain. Ciala finds herself attracted to the blind Serapio and his supernatural abilities. Finally, there is Akoa, a recent War College graduate informed that his mother has died under mysterious circumstances, leaving his sister as the new leader of the Carrion Crow clan and Akoa as her protector. As the convergence arrives, all our protagonists converge on Tova, and tensions come to a boil. Who will live? Who will die? For those answers, I guess you're going to have to read the sequel, Fevered Star. Anna, does that about sum it up?
I think so. The stuff that I would add is that it's a very special solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not just a solar eclipse, but it's like the alignment of like the sun, the moon, and the sun and the moon and Earth, I think.
Well, yes, but that's all eclipses.
Eclipse but like usually the most common one just the moon comes in front of the sun?
Yes. Well, no.
Are we going to have to Google this for our listeners, Dan?
We might, because I think the most common eclipse is actually the Earth in the middle between the sun and the moon, which is why you have a new moon. But for like a solar eclipse, we have people who work
for NASA among our listeners.
Okay, you know what? We're not going to look this up. We're going to rely on the Discord to adjudicate this one for us, which is, by the way, let me add another reason to become a patron of this show.
Yes.
So you can watch the Discord, occasionally take Anna and I to task if we get the science shit wrong.
I shouldn't have even tried, but it is a very special solar eclipse. I wanted to put that out.
I think the sun is at its weakest is the way that Roan Horse kept saying it.
You know, that stuff I kind of just like breeze by sometimes. Also, I think it's important that the Knight of the Knives happened specifically because the cult of the crow was gaining power and influence.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a threat to the sun priest caste, which is the dominant religion that everyone has apparently voted on as being the one that
basically all of the religions they're just pretending don't exist, even though this cult is clearly gaining power as the convergence is approaching. Was it called Obana or something, I think?
Oba is, I think, crow.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I found that whole part interesting, and I did think of you, this idea that these cultures would come together and be like, well, let's pick a religion. You know, we've been fighting too much. Belief is fungible. You know, believe one thing, believe another thing. We'll just pick some gods and not worry about what everyone wants to worship. We'll just tell them what to do. So that seems like a great idea. That work out in real life, Dan? Does that?
I don't think that's ever happened in real life would be the way. Or let me put it this way. When it has happened, usually Jews get killed. I'll just leave it at that. Like, that's usually what happens.
I guess you could say like papal, like, declarations or something like that. Just in the sense that, like, I find that part of Christianity fascinating, where people are just like, nope, this is what he meant. No one argue. This is like, I got it. I heard. And
let's just say it rarely sticks would be the way to put it, including in the, Christianity. So, usually what's done is, like, even if everyone says it, you just ignore what goes on, which is, by the way, kind of what happens in this book. So that's entirely fair.
All right. Well, speaking of religions, Dan.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How is this science fiction different from all other science fictions?
Well, for one thing, obviously, the Meridian is clearly based on pre-Columbian civilization. That is definitely a new thing. I don't think I've read any sci-fi that, that relied on that as sort of the origin story. The religion is, as you say, is also something that I think is interesting, because while there's been a lot of sci-fi or fantasy where religion plays a role, I think what I liked in this one was the sort of sophistication the Roan Horse brings to the religion, which is, on the one hand, you have this priestly caste that in theory exercises, complete ecclesiastical authority, but in point of fact, there are actual, cults and or, more, for lack of a better way of putting it, peasant-based religions. That's not, I'm not sure peasants exist in this.
Folk religions.
Folk religions, yes, that exist, that they have to deal with. What's interesting, you could argue, is that in contrast, the way Christianity very often dealt with these, there was the brute converting people, but very often what Christianity has done is taken those folk myths and just incorporated. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's
Christmas, Dan.
Yes, exactly. I'm pretty sure that's where the Christmas tree comes from, not to mention Halloween. So, it's, whereas in this
it's
novel,
just pure power. In this, it's just exactly. Although it's power, and also I think, and this is sort of an interesting IR part of it, I think, which is that kind of the knowledge that if we let these other religions flourish, then we will fight again, and we are tired of fighting. I mean, there seems like it was a sincere desire to make peace.
Yes. The other interesting,
it wasn't colonization. That's sort of interesting.
No,
it wasn't like we're trying to subdue these people. It was, we keep fighting about religion. So
I will say, one of the most interesting things about this, I think, is that, people would say, oh, it's pre-Columbian. The key thing is, by pre-Columbian, there is no external invader in this, or colonizer in this novel, which was, I think, frankly, refreshing in a lot of ways. And the other thing that was interesting, though, for me, was that there's clearly an ecclesiastical structure, and I assume that's also the source of political power, but there's not a ton of, like, secular authority in this.
There are ruling castes.
Sort of. I mean, there is in Toma, but like we don't learn much about the rest of the Meridian.
We may discuss this later.
Yeah, fair enough.
In a different section.
Yes. Okay. Yes, got it.
But I think, is there anything else that?
As I said, this is the overarching plot did feel kind of Game of Thronesy, in the sense of, like, it's all building up to one great convergence. And I confess, maybe it was just because the word sky kept being used around. I don't know if you ever watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, they kind of made fun of the Game of Thrones thing. They created the Skyfire series, and to hear Jake and Terry talk about it, I have to admit, I could see them getting into Black Sun in the exact same way.
Well, to my mind, there are a few things not specifically around that. Mm-hmm. There's a number of gender fluid characters.
That's correct.
And
yes.
I think, again, not having that in my personal experience, but having some of people in my life, they seemed well handled. Mm-hmm. And I think that's cool. And they're pretty matter of fact about that stuff. What I didn't so much like, and we might talk about this more in the character section, is that none of the gender fluid characters were main characters.
Correct. I mean, I only think, were there two? I mean, I think there were only two or three.
I mean, there's a reference. I think there's some references to like others, but like, and
This
is the first book I've ever read where the Z and Zer, the X pronouns,
XE
are
and
used,
XIR.
Which, by the way, I am kind of in favor of those because, like, I hate it that here's me doing a religious like pronouncement.
Yeah.
Like people fight about that shit so much, and it's just a language thing more than anything else. I mean, sorry, it's not just a language thing, but people say it's a language thing. So let's give them a language solution.
I will admit, this was one of those things where when I first read that, I was like, what the hell? And then I understood what I was reading, and I don't know, maybe this was a vestigial, like, conservative reaction. I was mildly irritated by it, but as I kept reading it and got more used to it, I really stopped caring about it. So maybe I think in the end you might be right about that.
And to be very clear, what I mean is the people who say they don't want to be bothered about pronouns, what they insist is that it's just a matter of being bothered by having to say certain pronouns.
Right. And I will say this is a way of handling that, at least on the page. If we did this in actual spoken conversation, it would be there would be like the brutal GIF or GIF wars, but I think it would work.
We already talked about this, but I did love that magic isn't like completely accepted.
Right.
It's an interesting. That doesn't happen a whole lot. I think,
and this is something that I think Roanhorse does a really good job of dealing with, which is their characters in this. Like one of the things I truthfully love is that Shiala, who has some magic. I mean, like she's clearly got her own abilities, but is very skeptical of the idea that Serapio might actually be a vessel of anything.
Yeah.
And like until the very end. So like, you know, the skepticism is equally sort of distributed and entirely appropriate. And so like, I think it's handled in such a way that on the one hand, these people are by and large, like not used to dealing with magic on a daily basis. So they're pretty skeptical, but then when confronted with evidence that it exists, they don't reject it out of hand. They're like, oh, okay, this is a thing.
And a really important plot point, actually, is that the priestly caste at the Sun House that don't personally believe.
Right.
And in fact, they don't believe that they are vessels for the god that they're supposed to represent, but it turns out they are. That I thought was kind of funny.
That is true. You know, actually, weirdly, that reminded me of Kevin Smith's Dogma, where it turns out like the bishop, like, you know, even though he's clearly not a believer, he nonetheless plays an extremely important part, you know, in the plot.
Yeah, and so to be clear, since we've already run some stuff, what happens is, so there's these 4 different clans or
Sky-made clans,
Sky-made clans, and each of them have a representative in the Sun House. And 3 of them are just like, yeah, we're just people. I mean, like, whatever, religion's fine. Like, they're not very, you know, pious at all. And they don't think of themselves as vessels of the god that they represent. They think of themselves as political actors only.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And kind of interchangeable. And then it turns out when the vengeful god comes, no.
Oh no, your role, that counts. Trust me. It's going to be pretty important. You
represent your god and I have to kill you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There is a bit of the god inside you. You are a vessel of the god. Sorry. You know, I thought it was not supposed to be funny, obviously, but part of me was like, oh, yeah, that's what you get.
It was ironic, I think the word that I would use here.
All right, so let's move on to the characters.
Okay. I mean, there were 3 characters that I found very compelling, and I suspect you found them compelling as well. The first one, which I suspect is your favorite as well, was Shiala. This is the teak woman / sailor / captain / drunk, you know.
Although I would say she doesn't seem like an alcoholic, not that I'm one, you know.
There you have, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, it's possible to drink a lot and just, you know, really just want to drink because you're like got some fucked up feelings, you know, like, and that's where I think she lands.
Right. I think one of the things I liked is, let me put this way, Shiala was the character that I thought Roanhorse dug the deepest in terms of like her internal, you know, thinking or internal monologue. And one of the things I really liked about those sections of the book is how Shiala always is thinking about how she's presenting to the rest of the crew, how she has to be the captain. Even there are times where she might want to drink, she's not going to, because like, and is able to immediately rule it out. So I agree with you. I don't think she's actually an alcoholic now that I think about it, but she likes a good time. Let's put it that way.
And I will say, Dan, that is a very accurate portrayal of what it's like to be a woman navigating the world.
A man's world.
Yeah. I mean, you have to constantly be thinking about like, how does this look? And who's going to be an ally? Can I trust this person? Are they taking me seriously? Are they condescending to me? And importantly, if I show too much power, does that mean that I will alienate them?
Yes.
If I become too competent.
It was exhausting. I hear it's exhausting being a woman, Anna. Is that correct? I mean,
But the fact that you got that is a testament to like her
to Roan Horse's work.
Yeah, because it's just very true. Like, because that's what happens with Zyla, is that once she shows the extent of her powers, her crew is not happy. Like they should be.
No, and that again, I think honestly the portions on the ship were the best parts of the book, and part of it is that there's a sequence where there's a storm. You know, and the crew originally likes the fact that she's Teak, because Teak are believed to have a song that can calm the seas. You know, that she's clearly an expert in terms of dealing with the water. But when 2 crew members go overboard, and she has to use her power to her fullest to rescue them, I believe she turns into a mermaid. Is that that was the thing, and that freaks them out, and the result is that they react badly to it.
Sort of understandably, but she did save someone's life.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah.
It is a gender thing that they just can't stand. They cannot handle it.
They clearly
handle it.
Yeah,
and they want to kill her. I mean, it's
right.
Okay, so yes, she is both of our favorite. Continue.
I was surprised by this because I wasn't expecting to sympathize, but I found Serapio, who, is the sort of blinded vessel. He was a compelling figure as well. And again, we discover a little bit of his backstory. And first of all, the relationship between him and Ciala was actually, I thought, very well done.
Weird sex scene, but
yeah,
very weird. I mean, I guess we can talk about it now, but like, he gets her off, and that's like it. Like, and he also, the thing that, what I hated about it is like, I'm going to give you a gift, I think is what he said.
You're welcome, Ciala. Okay. Yeah.
Like that gift is pretty freely obtained.
Okay. But you know what?
Like, what he's saying is like, I'm going to make you come, not, and I'm going to do special or whatever. I mean, I understand, like, in the context, he has to remain a virgin for the whole thing.
How do I put this? Maybe the metaphor is that, yes, you're correct, Anna. Obviously, she can, do that. But it's the difference between cooking for yourself at home and going to a really nice restaurant.
Correct. It is sort of like, then the metaphor is, and I'm a really good cook. I've never done it before. I've never made a single dish. I'm kind of operating, just flying blind here. But trust me, it's good. All right, trust me. But trust me, it's going to be awesome, even though I've never, ever cooked before. And it's the thought that counts, I guess. It does wind up being awesome, apparently. So.
Apparently, it's pretty good. Yes. But anyway, the point is, I like their relationship a lot.
Beginner's luck, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, let's put it this way: I think she was ready to dine and whatever.
I'm being a little bit picky, but just because that one line of like, I'm going to give you this gift.
No, that's absolutely fair. I think that's really...
Which I did laugh out loud. And then he ends it with, no, it was, you're the one who gave me the gift, which is just corny. Like,
but he was I feel
like that whole thing, the same series of actions could have happened, handled slightly differently in dialogue.
Yeah. No,
I can cross differently.
I will absolutely concede that point. I think that's. So. But let me put it this way: that was one of those scenes where I wasn't expecting that to happen, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like, again, it's like, you always want
she was.
Right, exactly. You want moments in you want moments in stories where you were surprised by the plot, and then when you think about it, it's like, okay, you know what? That's actually good. Consistent character. What
I found beautiful about that relationship, and that is if you'll pardon the phrase, the climax of their relationship.
Yes,
is the build-up as usual, which is that when they go through the market and the city together, and she's describing things for him, and he's like, that is the true intimacy, right? Like that is the actual intimacy being portrayed, and what happens in the hotel spa
Yeah.
is
The
the
consummation,
culmination,
as it were. Yes.
yes, of that. But I found their journey through the city and her describing things and the hymn and chocolate. This is kind
Yeah.
of a weird thing to specify, but you've said before, sometimes the describing food is a really good place to see an author kind of show off their
Yeah.
skills. And I thought the description of hot chocolate was really great.
It really was, yes. No, and I mean, Roanhorse even has. I mean, Serapio says later that was the happiest day he'd ever had, and so like, Roanhorse makes that believable.
And I should say hot cacao, I guess. It's not like hot chocolate like we have. It is the kind of what is sometimes called Mexican hot chocolate, right?
Right, it was Mexican hot chocolate with lots of chili.
Yeah.
Yeah,
or I guess in this case, Meridian
hot chocolate.
Hot chocolate.
Yes.
All right, go on.
The other character that I really liked, I think, and you were speaking of wanting more gender fluid present characters. I liked Icton, who was the head of I think chief of security, basically, or
his
head of
clan
counterintelligence.
Is the Knives clan.
Yeah. The point is that Icton, Roanhorse does a nice job of presenting Icton as sort of a character who always knows more than she lets on. And yes, and in that sense was well done. I wanted more Icton, would be the way I would put it.
And that is a case where I also thought that the gender fluidity was handled in a way that seemed to me, I got it. Like I understood that this character kind of was in some space.
Well, so I confess,
either male or female, and the physical description rang. I feel like I could see the character, so I think that worked for me.
Okay, I don't know.
I see your face. I don't know if listeners don't see it, but I see it.
I don't know if it quite worked for me. I mean, part of it is because everything I saw of Icton presented as male, I guess, with the exception of the pronouns, and so.
Yes, although I think I don't know. I can just kind of see like a beautiful, beautiful person.
Okay.
Who reads has some masculine, and also you can present as mainly masculine and still be gender fluid.
That's absolutely true. Also, I like the idea that someone who would be basically in charge of counterintelligence, you could see how gender fluidity might actually be an asset in that position. And
understand in presumably being able to kind of slip into both of that ways of thinking, having a feel for the entire spectrum of socialization or thinking, or however you want to put it.
Anna, were there any characters you liked that I failed to mention?
I thought Naranpa's brother has real potential.
Okay.
Introduced late in the game.
Right. Like, I think...
But he's the crime boss who kind of raised himself in the Maw.
In the Coyote's Maw, yep.
He has it's a pretty believable reunion that they have. And I liked him. I liked Okawa a lot, actually. Mainly because he rides the crow, I guess. But... and I actually also like Serapio. I think both of us have pretty, real problems with it. But there are some places where she pulled off really tough stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the portrayal of blindness in general, and I think also with Serapio, the idea that you could be a vessel for a god and still have like human concerns, human insecurities, human doubts, human desires. Like,
yes,
he seems like a real person. And yet also when the god inhabits him, that
you believe that the god inhabits him. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that worked really, really well. There is a character, I'm just bad with names in general. There's a character, the rival priestess.
Oh, the passive aggressive one. Yes.
I didn't like her. I'm not supposed to like her. But she's the mean girl. And that is like, it's a good portrayal of the mean girl.
It's a ba. I think it's a ba.
Iba?
A ba. Yeah.
And she has a heel turn that I think is pretty funny.
Yes. No. You're right. Like Aba was she was the Heather.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I think we've discussed sort of the parts of the book. So now we have to go a little more in depth. So I have a question.
Yes, Anna.
Is there IR in it?
Apparently, Anna, I don't want to have a good time with fun, attractive people. I want to be recording a podcast and talk with you about IR instead. It's a good thing you are also a fun, attractive person. I'm just going to leave it at that. And then I love talking about whether there's an IR in something. And, oh, by the way, there's definitely some IR in this book.
Oh my God. Even I could see the IR.
Yes. I think the two dominant things I thought reading this book that are clearly about IR was, first, there's a lot in this book that's really about leadership and whether it's possible to lead when one is in the minority. We see this with Naranpa in the Tower because even though, she's been in the priestly caste for decades, she's from the Maw, and that clearly is an issue. We also see it with Shyala on the ship because, again, even though she's Teak and there are ways in which that's an asset, there are more ways in which being a Teak woman is a problem for her. I do think that actually the contrast between the two of them, Roanhorse does a good job of sort of showing how information is in some ways, and a good theory of mind is the key to being a good leader, because Shyala can clearly read everyone on the crew much better than anyone else can.
Her EQ is very good.
Yes, exactly. And this is where I found, frankly, Naranpa a very frustrating character. And it's not... I don't think this is a criticism of Roanhorse. I think she has to be a frustrating character because...
I think she set her up as being...
Yeah.
I think Roanhorse set her up as being blinded by her own optimism and her own idealism, and also kind of set up to fail by her predecessor.
Yeah. She's the naive patsy, and it's frustrating to read, though, I think is the thing. So, but the contrast between the two of them is very good. I think what this book does exceptionally well, probably better than a lot of other books that I've read in this kind of genre, is show how old cleavages can reemerge with just the slightest nudge. In some ways, there isn't international relations in this book because this is all supposed to be one single polity, as it were. But, with just the slightest perturbation, you see on Shyala's ship, among the clans in Tova, frankly, between men and women. Again, something else that she does well in this book is the gender stuff is there. There's gendered politics. It's not the paramount thing, but it is definitely a thing. And it's one of those sort of cross-cutting cleavages. And obviously between the different parts of the Meridian. One of the things, again, Roanhorse does exceptionally well is, you get the sense that the Teak are very different from the Obregi, who are very different from the Tova clans, who are different from the Hakoya women, and different from Quekola. It's all... There's a lot of cross-cutting cleavages, and at any time they can lead to violence. I
should add something I meant to put in the story behind the story, which is that she is a Yale-educated lawyer.
Okay. So you're saying she's familiar with internecine fights among elites?
Yeah. Well, she went to Yale. I think her law degree is from elsewhere, but then she was a practicing lawyer for some time in indigenous Native people's law. So, I think she has a feel for this stuff that comes from somewhere. And it's some of the best parts of the book. I would say the best parts of the book are, for me, some of the writing. It's not beautiful writing. It's no Gone World, it's
functional.
Fine, and there's some stuff that you're I understand what she's saying here. I can totally see what she's describing. But the best parts of the book are the relationships and this kind of politics. Yeah,
no, the world building is not over. Again, and I want to be clear, her world building I find superior to Martin's because the problem with Game of Thrones is not that the world building lacks detail. The problem is the world building is just awash in detail.
Yeah.
Where you're get to the fucking point. Whereas Roanhorse, I think, paints... What Roanhorse does is she's not a pointillist, but she has just the right amount of brushwork for you to get the sense of all these various different places. And then she moves on with the plot, which is the way you should do it. Yeah. So, Anna, now that we're talking about, these sorts of things, I have a question for you.
Yes, Dan.
Is there a critique of capitalism in this book?
Dan, capitalism is a foolish man's crutch. And one weakness of the book is that Roanhorse leans on that crutch pretty hard and doesn't ask many questions. You probably noticed this. Capitalism just exists in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In much the same way it exists in the real world, which, you could say is itself a criticism.
Fair enough.
But she has castes that are just castes, you know, and she has classes that are just kind of classes. And there is money in the form of cacao, which is something that she's drawn from actual history.
Yeah.
Although I think one of the a point where it might have been interesting to drill down is why cacao.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way to put it is
it
that
fiat currency, Dan? Is it just like...
The answer is yes, Anna. Although unless, on the other hand, they do value the chocolate a fair amount, the hot chocolate. So there's a ways in which it's a commodity currency. It
is a commodity, but is it fiat? Is it just someone like this many cacao is worth like X? I mean, so she just does nothing. She just doesn't do very much.
Well, one of the things she actually doesn't say, which I was kind of
except that there is trade, but it's just kind of it's the you're soaking in it way that we experience capitalism today.
I was kind of curious. She never talks about where the cacao is grown. I don't think. Am I right about
that's
that?
What I mean. Would have been interesting to drill down on. Like,
that's
is
true.
Is it like gold? Is it because they have gold?
Oh, that's funny. I don't even remember the gold part.
They have gold. They have jewels.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So
why cacao? Cacao is lighter. Cacao? The answer is that medium exchange cacao is superior to gold.
Oh, I mean, it makes sense, but I would have been interested, and I suppose there's probably some Googling I could do to find out why cacao worked. And I do know it was a precious crop. I do know that. That is, I remember that much from my Latin American history class. So there's that. But yeah, there's just not a lot. It's interesting. I mean, I think her concerns are politics, which of course capitalism is there, but not her concern, right?
I think her concerns are politics, religion, and gender. Those would be the things that I would,
And not the intersectional part of it where it intersects with capitalism and class and labor. It's just it just exists in, like I said, in the same way that it exists in this world, which means it's ripe for criticism, but
but that's not where she's going. Yeah,
that's not where she's going.
Okay.
Rocks grinding against each other.
Yes. Oh, good. It's time for Discordant Notes. This is when we take questions from the patrons and answer them in the podcast. We have two really good questions.
In the channel on our Discord that is called Questions from the Discord.
Which, again, is another good reason to join the Discord. And the way you can do that is to become a patron. Just pointing that out. So Miranda SM asks, are there IR implications to the rise of non-European-based fantasy novels, of which Black Sun is just one example? And I would say to Miranda, that is a great question. To be clear, the existence of non-European-based fantasy novels is not going to cause any change in actual international relations.
I don't know, Dan.
I mean, I'm a little skeptical about it. What I do think is interesting, though, is that, and this is true within the IR community, is that one of there's been a movement to focus more on non-European IR. The argument is for a variety of reasons, consistent with the larger sort of changes in the culture. But one of the interesting things about non-European IR is that it's pretty hegemony friendly. The whole idea of realpolitik and balance of power politics and so on and so forth is largely based on European history. And part of that is just due to the geography of Europe, which is there's a lot of mountain ranges. It's tough to actually try to conquer the entire continent. Unsurprisingly, balancing happens. But there are
who won? I mean, that's why,
Yeah. Whereas, but if you look at China or Japan, the Pacific Rim, or you look at, Central America or South America, what you discover, or for that matter, the subcontinent, there are hegemonies. In other words, there winds up being one large kingdom. It rises and maybe it falls, but, there is a clear hierarchy, and that's why when you look at Asia-based international relations prior to colonization, it looks very different from the European system. And unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why the Chinese are really big on talking about what they refer to as Qianxia, which is the Chinese system of international relations in which China was at the center. And it was a very hierarchical structure. But there is actually a really complicated, one of the things I would love to see would be actual like North American treatments in fiction, because North American international relations pre-Columbian is actually pretty complex. There's been some work published at things like the Iroquois Confederation or the Creek Confederation, and those would there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I think the primary way in which it would be interesting is that it does allow for the development of very different norms and customs. Think the Confucian civil service system, which is very different from the way it worked in Western Europe. I know less about either the Aztec or the Incan cultures, but I suspect they have a few norms that are just a wee bit different from the Europeans.
One thing that I wanted to bring up as a possible real way that these books could have an impact on real world politics is that there are going to be generations of readers and students, young people, for whom Game of Thrones is not the only option in terms of when they think about world history and when they think about how politics works.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah,
that could mean a generational shift that would happen anyway, perhaps, right? But if you come into your, political science learning with these various kinds of cultures already in your head, like that they exist, I think it makes for a different conversation once you get even to graduate school. So
no, that's fair. I think that's a good point. And just being exposed to alternative narratives also, I think, could be something. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over time.
But speaking of alternative narratives, and you kind of mentioned this, but I'll expand on it. I think it would be so cool to see a high fantasy inflected retelling of colonization. Like...
Are we going to call it the White Walkers? Because that's really what,
Oh my, so good. It's something in which, like, you have indigenous peoples have a real resistance to the, European cultures that came. And I think that could be really cool. And I also think sort of following on that and a little bit towards what you were saying about the Iroquois Confederation and whatnot, it would be interesting to have maybe something set in a not quite as far away milieu where we have actual functioning native countries in America. Right now, reservations are considered, their own thing, but not really, right? But what if they were? Like, what if we had city-states?
Like an alternative history, like Underground Airlines or something where the
where we had like city-states kind of just dotting the U.S.
That would be actually kind of interesting. Yeah, I agree. That would be.
And you could take it to fantasy by making it kind of farther back in history, I suppose.
Right.
But just the IR implications of just having some random
No, it'd be fascinating.
Here is a different country surrounded by this other country.
For lack of a way of putting it, we'd have a ton of Swazilands.
Huh?
We'd have a ton of Swaziland. Swaziland is a country that is completely surrounded by South Africa, so you would have the similar sort of setup.
I don't know. That would be interesting to me.
Yeah.
We have another question from the Discord, Dan.
We do.
I think one of the best questions we've ever gotten.
Yes, I agree. Go ahead.
Carrie asks, "What giant animal would you like to ride?"
Yes, because in the world of Black Sun, there are crows that essentially function kind of like dragons, I guess, for lack of a way of putting it, in Game of Thrones. And my answer to this is obviously Space Dog.
See, I don't know. Yeah. So, Dan, I've got to go with Kitty. Yeah, I think a dog is going to be a more dependable ride. The thing is, the cat riding a magical flying cat is going to go where they want to go.
See, that's the problem. Like, I think my brain went to Space Dog, not because they would necessarily be the best fighters, but because I don't think they would try to kill me. Whereas Space Kitty... Kitty's
a pretty good fighter, gotta say.
Yeah.
But anyways, we have another section. Is the pieces of the rookery.
Yes.
Debris field.
Yep.
Dan, what do you got?
Just a few things, I think. First of all, this is a harrowing opening chapter. Just worth pointing that out, and I will warn readers that this book starts with a blinding. There's no other way to put it, and I have to admit that it was off-putting. Yeah. It took me, like, the first 50 pages were a struggle for me to read. After that, I started getting into it.
As a parent, perhaps especially.
Yeah, that was not good. So I just a warning, and I was, again, partially it was because she did it so effectively, but also deeply unpleasant.
I liked the architecture of the cities she described. Tova especially is apparently like built on mesas, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, with deep ravines between them, and they have bridges connecting them. And that seems like a cool way to set up a city. I don't know. Like, I like that. I also liked the War College, which we didn't hear much about, but I kind of liked the idea of it.
I was disappointed by the War College because when they said War College, I was like, all right, yeah, I'm on board with this.
There's going to be classes.
Give me this War College. And it's like, wait, what the hell is this? This is a bullshit War College. They're not studying how to do war.
What's funny is they literally mean teaching people to fight, which is not what a War College is.
Not what we normally think of with a War College.
All right, your turn.
I had a powerful craving for corncakes after reading this book. The food descriptions are pretty good, as we said, and like that was the one commonality as near as I could figure out across the entire meridian was that they were eating corncakes, and I wanted some of those.
It is a high B plus for me in terms of a good read. I mentioned this before, but I really loved the teak navigational style, which is apparently based on Polynesian culture, which is not to navigate by the sun and the moon and the stars, but more intuitive reads of currents and wind and where birds are appearing. And, you know, Polynesians went long ways doing this. And I had not known that was a very different way of navigating, and apparently, works.
I think I would have liked to have again, I talked before about how like Roan Horse's world building is mostly in sort of broad brush strokes, and you get a sense of a variety of things. There were things I was hungry to learn more about, like Kuala is supposed to be the commercial capital. I was kind of curious about why. Like just looking geographically, that was not an obvious thing for me. In fact, Tovashe should have been the commercial capital based on the distribution of everything. Also, why is Kuala more male-dominated and Tovashe more female-dominated? I kind of wanted to know that too. I was willing to accept that it was just different. That's fair. I kind of wanted to like one or two explanatory sentences for it.
I feel like perhaps what has happened is not that she hasn't thought about that.
Right.
But rather that she has thought about it a lot. And this is just a snapshot of the world that she perhaps has created in her head. Like, I think if we went to her and asked her these questions, she might have answers for us.
Yes. No, I think that's true.
And I think one of the reasons this rises as high as it does is that it doesn't feel like those are blank spots, right? Like, it doesn't feel like this just is a hand wavy thing.
Oh, no, I agree with that.
There's a reason why these things exist the way that they do.
Yeah.
It's just she has chosen not to put that in the book.
Right.
And I bet there's some good fan fiction about this book.
Oh, there's some Ciala Serapio fan fiction. Like,
yeah. Well, you're talking about like Slash. Yeah. But I also meant just like,
I know. Yeah.
Like further stories and appendici and whatnot.
Yeah.
All right. So is that it for you, Dan? Is that all your debris?
The only thing I wanted to say, like, again, there are some moments of good writing. I just want to read like one quick thing where it's right before Serapio is going to leave Kuala on the ship. And, he describes the fact that he, had no desire to linger in the foreign city, that under a layer of fragrant black copal smelled of blood, hot stone, the sweat of laboring men, and sour ambition. And, that's a nice line. I like that.
Yeah, there are definitely spots. I feel like I don't mean to damn with faint praise, right? Like, my general recommendation on this book is if you are interested in depictions of other cultures in fantasy, right? Like, this is a great place to go. Like, you will not regret reading this. Again, with the faint praise. Read it. You should read it. I would say, folks, read it. You? What would you say? Read it?
I would definitely say read it. Let me put it this way. I think I'm going to buy the next book. That would be the way to put it.
Yeah. Like, I couldn't believe it was available in my library.
That's great. I will say,
it up.
That said, we talked about this,
right?
We do have to talk about this.
We actually talked about this.
Yeah. The ending was annoying as fuck. There's no other way to put this.
I totally agree. It felt like she just stopped typing.
Basically, yes. There is no, like, the convergence happens.
There's a great scene of the bloody battle.
Right. And then that's it, basically. Like, we're not going to, you're like, do you want to know what happens next? Hey, how about you buy this other book? And
he flies away on the back of a bird.
Right.
And then they disappear into the sunset. And we don't know any of the political, fallout or any of the personal fallout or
right.
where Zyla is. Like, we don't know any of that.
Yeah, she just disappears throughout the last couple 50 pages of the book, I would say. And so, yeah, I wasn't crazy about the ending. And so, but that said, I'm intrigued enough by the plot so that, God damn it, she's making me think about reading the next.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
I can tell you this much, which is it picks up literally like exactly where.
Oh, no, I know, because the version I have has like a sneak preview for the next chapter. So, you know, but that said, I wasn't crazy about that. And yeah, I'm just nitpicking.
All right. I think we've covered everything. So let's start to close. Mm-hmm. If you haven't become a patron and you like this show, well, go to patreon.com/Space the Nation and become a patron. Please. It's a great way to support the show.
We'd really be happy.
Also, you can do a non-financial support of the show, which is to tell your friends and neighbors and rate and review us. We always talk about the Discord as being one of the main reasons to join. Mm-hmm. It is. Yep. It's if I was on the fence about it, especially with the disappearing cool social media options that we have. Mm-hmm. I think that our Discord's pretty great.
We got a bunch of awesome nerds there. Yeah.
Although we are on social media, Dan.
That's true. We are both on Mastodon. We are also both on Blue Sky. I am at Dan Dresner. She is at Anne-Marie Cox. Anna, you are also on Instagram, I believe.
Yep.
I am on Substack. I have a Substack called Dresner's World, which actually just celebrated its 1-year anniversary, so that was lovely.
Oh, congratulations, Dan.
Yes, and things seem to be going well there. And I believe you have a website. Is that correct, Anna?
I have a website where you can keep up with me. By the time this is out, I will have my cover story that I've been working on all summer long is finally out, and now I have to start thinking about the next one. But I'm really proud of it. It's about America as a traumatized patient, and it was not fun to write, but it
also not fun to experience, by the way. So yeah,
yes. But it was really kind of cool to see it come together, and it's the first long read thing I've done in a while. So check it out. And then my website, I have writing workshops that I do. The next one will be for health reasons. I'm not doing a fall one. I canceled the fall one, but the next one will be this winter. And also I am doing a NaNoWriMo writing group, which is National Novel Writing Month in November. There will be morning sessions that you can join.
And remember her website, www.annamariecox.com.
That is correct. Spell this name just pronounced differently.
Yeah.
Anyway, until next time.
Keep this channel open for more.